And it also helps from them just trying to figure out what their ultimate tax might be and planning for how they're going to pay the tax as well. If you're, if we're on the seller side.
How much time before a transaction would you like to see, you know, the idea of the transaction start kind of playing with the different scenarios?
I would prefer to know when, the client or the one of the parties, whichever one I'm representing, is in the stages where they might already have set, found a buyer or a seller, and that transaction is really starting to be fleshed out, so that they really have kind of an understanding of what they're selling or what they're doing. And then we can come in and say, oh, well, that you might want to consider this or that. You might want an asset sale versus a stock sale because of these transactions. And you have more flexibility to, this goes to being whether you're a buyer or a seller in those
Sure.
transactions and the whole planning. But sometimes there are things that you can do that might adjust the price even because,
Yeah.
we mentioned sometimes, the purchaser wants to buy assets. And so sometimes the seller can negotiate a little higher price because their tax might be higher on that. There are just things that go into playing. So from a planning perspective, the earlier we can get involved, the more beneficial advice we can give to them. And it also helps from them just trying to figure out what their ultimate tax might be and planning for how they're going to pay the tax as well. If you're, if we're on the seller side. On the buyer side, you don't have that issue, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. And in my example earlier, there might be ways to spread payments and in that reduce tax liability for those involved.
We did have a client a couple of years ago who had gone through their transaction and they found out they didn't like the tax implications, and they were able to go back and renegotiate and change their deal to some extent. That's more on the rare side,
Right.
but sometimes those types of things can happen. It was really because they came in and they saw, wow, this is really not what we anticipated or what we thought was going to happen. And they were able to work with their buyer to restructure and all the legal. I mean, that costs them a lot more in legal fees to do. But, so if we can get in earlier on the planning side, that helps avoid some of those types of things.
As you mentioned earlier, all these situations have different details, which have different outcomes. So understanding all the ins and outs is really critical.